All right. Welcome to CHI's Unlearning Our Loneliness. We are in week 6, The World of Love. Last week, we discussed Chekhov's The Lady with the Dog to discuss the problem of deception, especially self-deception, when it comes to unlearning our loneliness. Gurov, the protagonist, remained profoundly lonely throughout the story in spite of a marriage, children, friends, and numerous affairs. Chekhov indicated that this may have been rooted in Gurov's convenient relationship with the truth, which removed intentionality from his choices and let him believe that none of his lovers truly knew him. The end of the story opened up a possibility for love based in a genuine seeming moment of compassion and pity. Whether that became love, Chekhov leaves to the reader's imagination. Preview for this week, we'll discuss Kevin Brockmeier's short story, These Hands, which confronts readers with a twist on the familiar cultural narrative regarding soulmates. The narrator's soulmate is 18 months old. Brockmeier does an excellent job of staying away from sexualizing the infant, making clear that their unconsummated love is nonetheless perfect. Throughout today's class, we'll examine Brockmeier's strategy for applying descriptions of love to an infant and explore what it does and does not say about love. Throughout, we'll pursue the question, how does our openness to love alter our perceptions of the world? So, starting out on page 3, this is from a collection of short stories called Things That Fall from the Sky. He's a Writer's Workshop graduate, so he comes back to give readings here every now and then. Anyway, page 3. The protagonist of the story is named Lewis Winters. He is also the narrator, and he is also me. First sentence of the story is metafiction at its finest, including the me that's neither neither narrator nor character. It tells us clearly that the story is written with more than a small dose of irony. You know, from the outset, you're aware that the writer is being very self-aware about what's going on, just given that much of a description. Page 4, quote, the lover, now absent, of the protagonist of the story is named Caroline Mitchell. In the picture framed on his desk, she stands gazing into the arms of a small tree. Her eyes are a miracle, and he is certain that if he could draw his reflection from them, he would discover there a face neither foreign nor lost. She is 18 months old. So there's a slight nod to Nabokov and Lolita after this, which follows in the footsteps of the first sentence. It's a wink to the reader, letting the reader in on the joke, not allowing the reader to sink wholly into the story. Right? Any metafictional move that an author makes always requires a certain amount of distance. So whereas a conventional narrative does everything possible to get the reader to become more and more integrated and woven into the thread of the story, metafiction tends to have the opposite effect. It keeps the reader at a critical distance. Humor will do that. Irony definitely does that. And a lot of times, a deceitful narrator, something like that. If you can't trust the narrator, you're also pushed away from the text of the story, right? You can't absorb it because you can't trust what's being told to you as being true. In this case, it's not that we don't trust the narrator, but we're very, very aware that there's a lot of irony in the story. So you just can't immerse yourself in it the way that you might with a more conventional text. Does that make sense? All right. Pages 5 through 6. Lewis meets Lisa Mitchell, the mother of Caroline, in her bathrobe. She thought that he had described himself as Lois, not Lewis, and Lewis says that he's a storyteller who writes fairy tales, that he's comfortable with kids. I think I understand them, is what he says. And he also says that he can start that day. So Lisa's been advertising a position to watch over her daughter, and Lewis applies, gets the job. And he does after on page 8. He pretends to cry in order to comfort Caroline. This is kind of the job screening process that conveniently erupts as the infant starts to cry. And this is Lewis's response. Quote, shuddering, he burst into tears. His eyes sealed fast and his lips flared wide. He could hear the world outside growing silent and still as he wept. When he looked out at her, Caroline was no longer crying. She blinked out at him from wide, bewildered eyes, her bottom lip folding in hesitation. Then she handed him the damp towel. It was a gesture of sympathy, meant, Lewis knew, to reassure him. So it works, the plan that he has. Page 9, Brockmeier mentions that there's a wish to be young together and to grow old together. Given their age difference, maybe not the most likely wish, but it's his wish nonetheless. Page 10, he describes magnets as a metaphor for love. In the way he puts it is that there's something there It looks like nothing, but you can feel it, right? And so throughout, he gives a lot of metaphors to help understand what love is or what love might be. And in this case, the kind of attraction that magnets feel, he doesn't speak of it in terms of attraction, but in terms of love, right? There's something, and it's love being indicated by the presence of something that's invisible, that can't be there, but that's felt, right? And so there's an emphasis that he gives on feeling, or the experience of a feeling even, over sight. It's nothing that's certain, but it's something that you can have conviction about nonetheless. Page 11. Lewis takes her see and say and finds that, quote, dog and pony and monkey and elephant, robin, twit, twit, whistle. Lewis, so it's one of those broken toys, right? And so everything that he goes to doesn't matter. It always says the twit, twit, whistle, whatever animal it is. Lewis sets the toy against the wall, listens to the cough of a receding car. He passed through the dining room, wandered the deep and inviolate landscape of the house, solemn with the thought of faulty lessons and of how often we're shaped in this way. And Brockmeier's story is great because it has a lot of those little moments. You know, a very particular interaction with the toy gives rise to the notion that we're shaped by faulty lessons. Who we are, how we come to be in the world, has more to do with misinformation and miseducation than it does with having honest interaction with the truth. And it's a hard thought to have to swallow, but as you think about it, if you let it just kind of take root in your mind, it's really, really hard to disprove that at the same time. Doing okay so far? All right. Page 12. Here, Brockmeier delivers an excellent ode to the meaning of love that begins with a myth or parable, moving into a rational discussion of disambiguation, and ending with a concrete and particular manifestation of love's expression. In a lot of ways, it repeats the structure of the symposium at its best. So here he goes. Quote, an old story tells of a man who grew so fond of the sky that he made of his heart a kite and sailed it into the firmament. There he felt the high mechanical tug of the air. His gaze, the story continues, he tied like a long string to his heart, and never looking down lest he pull himself to earth, he wandered the world ever after in search of his feet. End quote. And what that does, I think, is get to right the soaring feeling of love and our longing to remain only loosely anchored to the pedantic, mundane qualities that exist when walking the earth. Right? He wants to set himself soaring, not bother with moving his feet along. Then Brockmeier continues, quote, talking about love, I suspect, is much like this story. What is it then that insists that we make the intent? The hope of some new vision? The drive for words in order? We've been handed a map whose roads lead to places we understand. Now, says a voice, disentangle them. And though we fear that we will lose our way, still there's this wish to try. Perhaps, though, if we allow our perceptions of love to brighten and fade as they will, allowed even if they glow no longer than a spark launched from the fire, perhaps we will not pull our heart from its course. Surely this is possible. Here, Brockmeier distinguishes the experience of love from thinking or talking about it. So when we're in the grip of love, I mean, it's a passion. And passion has the same root, of course, as passive, right? It's something that we undergo. It's something that grabs us and takes control of us. We aren't in charge of our own love. We don't control the motion of our own heart or its gravitation or its pull. It's something that we're passive in the face of. Passion, of course, also leads to pain and suffering. Also things that we undergo. Also things that we don't have control over. So the experience of love is as a passion. Reflecting on love is another order of consciousness that takes this experience as though it were an object for a thinking eye or a subject to consider, right? It divorces you from that primary experience of being gripped by a passion and relieves you from that uncontrolledness and allows you some amount of access and reflection. I'm thinking about it, I'm not living it. Does that distinction make sense? Okay, so that's what he's trying to disentangle, is the experience of love, its passion, from thinking or talking about it, which is its reflection. When we're up here, we want to understand the motives behind our feelings. Chekhov and lots of other stories that we've read so far, offer good illustrations as to why and why that's important to do. Brockmeier here illustrates the risk. By putting love into words, by introducing causes and effects, we threaten to kill what makes it special. Right? There's something magic about the passion of love. There's something that's wonderful in its inexplicable nature. Why this and that suddenly, when they come together like magnets, spark something that was never there before. It introduces something brand new into the world. It gives birth to something uncreated that had never existed. And that's at the level of passion. We undergo it as we experience it. And if we talk about it here and say, oh, it was caused by the fact that, yeah, I maybe had one too many Blanc Fatales that night. I shouldn't have had that other shot of whiskey. I'm really fond of the like a red velvet color. I like that dress. Voila, it's love. Like if you know the causes, oh, it's just a hormonal imbalance at that particular night that inspired something that it shouldn't have. Whatever it is, to know, to understand love, to understand its causes, kills it. It deprives it of its magic. There's nothing to wonder about. And so he's leery of this order of things. That's the advantage in some ways of myth over philosophy. Does that make sense?
It reminds me of when we were talking about Fichte's conception of like thinking about myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So here is a me that's being gripped by something. Here is an I that can think about that me that's being gripped, but retain more kind of control or power over the situation. Because it reduces that experience to an object of thought instead of something that's unthinkable in its just ongoingness. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, go back to the story. Quote, "My love, then, for Caroline is what slows me into sleep at night. It is a system of faith inhabiting some part of me that's deeper than I've ever traveled." And just to break from the story, his descriptions of love are fantastic. And that's the only way that I think he can sell this story. The premise that you can fall, that your soulmate is 18 months old while you're a 28-year-old man is horrifying in some ways, right? It's just like there's something kind of just really grotesque about that. It's creepy, yeah. Even though in general, lots of us swallow the myth of soulmates that's pumped into all sorts of Hollywood movies, like, oh, it's love at first sight, and we can accept that. When you're talking about a friend who just met somebody, like, oh, it was love at first sight, you can accept that. But, that's usually when you're within like 2 to 5 years of age, maybe a little older, more of a gap if you're older, maybe not. But there's always something that makes that okay. This age gap isn't okay. And so a lot of what Brockmeier is trying to do is really look at how seriously we can take that myth, because from Lewis's perspective, there's nothing inconsistent about it. And how he describes the feeling of love is so beautiful and so genuine that you want to believe that that's how he feels, even though it's absurd. Then what makes it absurd? Like, what's the age gap supposed to be? Like, do you only fall in love at first sight when they're over 18, over 21, within 3 years? Like, what's the parameters? But if it's love, if it's really love, it shouldn't matter how old they are.
It's half your age plus 7. Pretty sure.
Well, okay, we're gonna get to but in theory, soulmates shouldn't be bound by age. It's not sexual. There's nothing creepy going on. It's not creepy. He stays away from creepy. They're soulmates. It's love at first sight in that deep and enduring sense. So as you listen to Brockmeier's description of it, keep that in mind. She's 18 months old, and this is how he feels. It's a system of faith inhabiting some part of me that's deeper than I've ever traveled. The thought of her fills me with comfort and balance, like heat spilling from the floor register of an old building. My love for Caroline is the lens through which I see the world, and the world through that lens is a place whose existence addresses my own. Super powerful. Apt, right? Do you feel it? Like, does that echo your own experiences of love? What if she was 18 months old? But it's the particularization of the experience. It's putting words to the feelings, but it doesn't disentangle its reasons, right? He's not following a map back to the, oh, well, Carolyn Mitchell is da-da-da-da, because it's absurd to do that. He can't do that with an 18-month-old. And so if you buy into the story, which again, he's keeping you from doing entirely, but the part of you that wants to buy into the story to see what love is there, he can't explain the reasons because it's absurd. All he can do is talk about the experience of it. But if you look at what he's saying, if you listen to the metaphors that he's using, it doesn't matter how old the person is. Any motion of love, any spark of connection that you might feel is just as absurd as it would be if she were 18 months old or he were, 70 years older than you. It doesn't matter. It's still absurd. Love doesn't make sense. Right? When you try to explain, well, why do you love her? Well, it's because love. It's not because of any of those things. Not really. Not really. All of the becauses that we try to come up with are just ways of trying to disentangle the map, but it doesn't work. There's no because of love. It just is, or it isn't. It's on or off. It's a binary switch. Because if a love can be caused, it can be uncaused, right? And that's kind of a hard thought to swallow too. I love you. Oh, I love you because of these 4 reasons. Oh, you're not doing number 4 anymore. It's off. No more love. Right? And so he's really pushing heavily on that uncausedness, the illogic of it, the irreducible mystery of it. And that's part of what's structuring the story. Does that make more sense of why Carolyn Mitchell is 18 months old? Is that easier to deal with now, Jim? A little bit?
A little bit.
Okay. But it's also just these descriptions. Love is a system of faith. Love is comfort and balance. Love is the lens through which you see the world. It's beautiful language. And it's about an 18-month-old girl. Page 14. Quote, salient point is an early and sadly obsolete term for the heart as it first appears in the embryo. The heart, I believe, is that point where we merge with the universe. It is salient as a jet of water is salient, leaping continually upward. What I love of Caroline is that space of her at rest behind the heart, true and imminent, hidden and vast. I would like to cobble such few sentences into a tower, placing them in the world so that I might absorb what I can of these things in a glance. But when I say I love you, we say it not to shape the world. We say it because there's a wind singing through us that knows it to be true, and because even when we speak them without shrewdness or understanding, it is good, we know, to say these things. Once again, it's just a different way of making these same points, right? When we say I love you, it's the wind singing its truth through us. We're passive. We speak the words, but love speaks its language through us. And we say it because it's good to say it. But it's not that it's a truth that we own. It's nothing that we can force into the world. It emerges. It sings through us. And it's good to say. And what other way can we honor what is hidden and vast? So in that section of 14, Brockmeier once again weaves together the physical and the immaterial through the use of metaphor, right? The notion of salient points and the notion of the heart for him is kind of a nexus between the physical and the immaterial. And we speak of that fairly often, right? That's a fairly common metaphor. What he wants to do is look at it to speak of the truth of what's felt at emotional and physical levels, because we can't separate those in our own experience, right? What you feel in your heart emotionally, you also feel physically. When your heart breaks emotionally, it hurts physically. You can't push them apart, really, not really. So speaking love is speaking truth for Brockmeier. It's something simple. It's something descriptive, right? We're just describing the world as it now appears to us, and it appears through us through a lens of love. That's what there is. That's how we see it. Pages 15 through 18 talk of the story that he tells Caroline about her life in a soap bubble. And it's a long, beautiful, whimsical story, and I'm not going to take the time to read it tonight because there are other things to do. But when you read it on your own, it's well worth your time to really appreciate and enjoy. So there you go. Page 20, the metaphor of music. Quote, of all the forms of voice and communion, a song is perhaps the least mediated by the intellect. It ropes its way through the tangle of our cautions, joining singer to listener like a vine between two trees. Song is an exchange exactly that immediate and physiological. It tests the life of the singer through our skin and through our muscles. Speech is sound shaped into meaning through words inflection, and modulation. Music is sound shaped into meaning through melody, rhythm, and pitch. A song arises at the point where these two forces collide. Where then is song most actual and rich? In the singer or in the audience? Love, of course, has the same blend of the immediate and the physiological, and as Rick Zamakis attested in the symposium, love has built into it the ability to harmonize. Love, too, pushes through our cautions and offers the possibility of joining us together. That's why it's important that he discusses it as a collision of two forces, right? Speech and song speech and music come together to make song, right? They're two forces that collide. That's also what love is. It's a collision. It's an intersection. It isn't an accident. It's not a rupture. It's a joining together of components that belong together intertwined, that have always belonged together intertwined, right? The way that song can't be song without music always already there. It's song always, but that collision of music and speech is part of it. Does that make sense? Okay. Brockmeier continues, quote, "A successful song comes to sing itself inside the listener. It is cellular and seismic, a wave coalescing in the mind and in the flesh. There is a message outside and a message inside, and those messages are the same, like the pat and thud of two heartbeats, one within you, one surrounding." And this too sounds like love. But thinking about it in terms of song allows us to disentangle our need to romanticize and idealize the experience. Love strums within us, connects us, both to another and to the world beyond us. Right? What he's getting to, like this, right? That invisible attraction is love is a point of integration. Harmonization, like all those images of gathering together. That's the force of love. That's what love does. Page 23. Brockmeier also provides insight into how much interpretation goes into the event of love and the development of a relation, or into the event of love and the development of a relationship, how much intentionality we ascribe to the beloved and to the world in making sense of how we feel inside. At the top of the page, Brockmeier describes a kiss. Quote, "The flat of her tongue passed up his chin and over his lips, and stopping at his nose, inverted and traveled back down. Lewis could feel it tensed against him like a spring, and when it swept across the crest of his lips, he lightly kissed its tip. Carolyn closed her mouth at the tiny pecking sound. Lewis blinked and touched a finger to his dampened chin. His ears were tingling as if from a breeze. His head was humming like a long, flat roadway." It's a kiss or a lick, right? Or a kid exploring the world mouth first. It all depends on interpretation. And Lewis's interpretation is through eyes that are willing to see love. It happens to the ears also, as the narrator recounts. Quote, "I knew what Carolyn told me, though when she said it, she was mumbling from sleep. And though it sounded to the ear much like igloo or allegory, when with a quiet and perfect affection she said, 'I love you.'" It's interpretation. And eyes that love and ears that love, when the world of love emerges through that lens, all those things become crystal clear that otherwise might be a little bit murkier. Does that make sense? Okay. Pages 24 to 27, he takes her to the playground. The picture is taken that he has framed as he's writing this, and so that gets worked in. Page 28. He starts talking about nostalgia for the place of the beloved. Quote, "Though it often appears in my memories and dreams, I have not returned to the playground in many days. It is certain to have changed, however minutely, and this is what keeps me away. My fear is that the park has simply paled with all its contents into an embryonic white, that flattening like a photograph too long exposed, it is curled at its edges and blown away. In my thoughts, though, it grows brighter each day, fresher and finer and more distinct, away from my remembering eyes." In the immediacy of love, there's something that's both immediate and that we want to have be eternal and timeless, about the experience of love, right? The way that a love event inscribes itself in our memory, it does so with such force, such immediacy, that it springs out from time itself to become something more eternal than that, right? We don't want that illusion, that true sense that feels right about that event of love to be exposed as flawed when time, of course, passes on. So from Lewis's perspective, the easiest way to go about it is not to return to the part and just let it stay as it is frozen in his mind, because that's true too. Does that make sense? Okay.
Wait, return to it as in
Just
like,
go back to the playground.
oh, all right. I was wondering if he meant like not even try to remember it.
Oh no, like the memory is what he has, but it's like you can't step in the same river twice. He goes back to the playground. It's not the same playground. It's not that playground. It's not that minute or not that memory. That's gone, and he'll never get it back, except for here when he thinks about it, and he prefers the imagined to the real, because the real's changed, but the imagined is a gift that he'll have forever. Does that make sense?
So it's imagined in the sense that it's happening exclusively within his mind, but not in the sense that he's contriving it.
Yeah, right. It's imagined in that he brings to consciousness the memory of that instant at the playground, which is deeply etched, right? It's a vast part of his the topography of love that he feels for Carolyn Mitchell. On the map of that island of love, it's got a huge place. It's prominent, and he can explore it, but only in his imagination, only in his memory, not in reality. Because reality is different. There'll be other kids there, right? A couple different leaves will have blown there. Maybe another car is parked. Whatever. It's changed. He doesn't want it to change because that betrays the fact that it's not eternal. He doesn't want that fact to be betrayed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Page 32. On 32, Brockmeier offers a list of numbers. So it's this many days since I've seen her, this many times she laughed, this many times she spit up. It's like a page and a half of just different numbers that he's offering. And I think the point of this is to look at the impossibility of quantifying the how of someone's meaning in your life. On the one hand, the things that he remembers, puzzles and diapers and songs on the radio, kinds of thoughts, Caroline and lifts, macaroni, whatever, they seem right in articulating the ways that things are significant. On the other hand, it's impossible to actually keep one's thoughts straight when the center of your world disappears. It's as though each thought is colored by one's love, right? And so, again, if you look at the world of love, once there's love, everything in the world is transformed, right? And it's that second, it's that love at first sight second, there's a new center to that world, and that's the beloved. And everything that you do, everything that you think, every part of your past, right, your past has led up to the point of your meeting, right? Everything that's come before, everything that you've done and thought, every other person that you thought you loved, every person you broke up with, where you went to school, what job you had, all gets you to the beloved, right? The past is wholly reimagined. Everything in the present comes to signify something about the beloved, right? So time away, things that you're going to do tonight or tomorrow morning, right? Things that are always present or in your immediate horizon, all focus around the beloved. And the future does too, right? Every future points outward to more time that you can spend with the beloved. Everything in your life is completely reconfigured, and the problem is, once the beloved drops out of the picture, everything falls apart. There's no center to the world. And you have all these fragmented memories that don't go anywhere. There's no coherence in your life anymore. It falls apart, and it shatters. And there's just a list of numbers, right? Here's how many times I heard Caroline on the radio, Sweet Caroline, and here's macaroni and cheese, and here's diapers and puzzles. But they don't add together. There's no picture anymore. There's no past, because everything you thought about your past is broken. There's no future, and there's no present. And the power of love is its ability to integrate a world magically and beautifully where everything coheres and makes sense. Once love leaves for whatever reason, all that goes away. And it's horrifying. And again, I think of Aristophanes and his dark and dreadful presentiment about what love means.
Which one was Aristophanes?
He had the myth of the two sundered halves that come together.
Oh, yeah.
And there is something dark and dreadful about the failure of love and the fault lines that just erupt and create a fissure and a hole and a collapse. Does that make sense? Page 33, Brockmeier lists the lie about Nabokov as a funner side. So at the beginning of the story, he claims he's never read Nabokov and never heard of Lolita. And he mentions, like, how many lies about Nabokov? One. Okay, that's pretty obvious. But don't let that overwhelm the lesson about love, because I think he says something important about love through his list of numbers. I mean, it's kind of an absurd list of numbers, but there's something true about it. And that truth is that the numbers don't add up, right? The becauses don't add up. That there's something about love that math fails when it confronts. There's no science to it. It's a magic, and it's a mystery. All right, ready to move on? Page 34. Lisa arrives home early. Quote, Lisa Mitchell rarely arrived home before the moon was as sharp as a blade in the night sky, never once before evening. Now she sat clutching a small leather purse in her lap, and a stream of sunlight delineated each thread of her hair. It was mid-afternoon. Early day? Asked Lewis. Lisa Mitchell neither moved nor spoke. She simply held her purse and stared. Hello? He tested. She sat motionless, queerly mute, like a table lamp or a podium. Then her shoulders gave out a single tight spasm, as if an insect had buzzed onto the nape of her neck, and her eyes glassed with tears. Lewis felt, suddenly, understanding and small and human. Do you need anything, he asked? Some water? Lisa drew a quick, high breath and nodded. End quote. The insight that David Foster Wallace contributed about compassion's foundation at the heart of love helps us to see this as an important moment in the story. Lewis feels small and human compared in contrast to the giant ways that he's able to love Carolyn. Right? When he has his world together, he's a giant. Lisa makes him feel vulnerable and small and helpless. And although Caroline is nothing but vulnerable, Lewis can't relate to her as he would a true partner, a true companion, or a true love. And here, in a small moment of compassion, Lewis feels the kind of powerlessness that seems important for unlearning one's loneliness. Right? In that overpowering sense of love at first sight, you don't feel powerless. You can't. You're overwhelmed by it, and it enhances you and what your being is. But to really help yourself unlearn your loneliness requires feeling absolutely broken and devastated and small. Because that's the only way that another person will ever be able to become intertwined and integrated with who you are deep inside. Does that make sense?
The only way they could ever become integrated with who you are deep inside is if they're in that position to then
If you're in that position, right? You know, if it's only when you find yourself reduced, small and vulnerable, is there any room for anybody else's love to truly come in and affect you? Right? I mean, what he feels for Carolyn is big and vast. And the size of that feeling blocks anything that actually comes from her. Right? It's not like Carolyn loves him, really, or has any ability to know what that would mean. And he interprets what she has as being love in ways, but it doesn't work. It's insignificance that lets us become loved. And it's only in allowing ourselves to be loved by another that we're able to unlearn our loneliness. Does that make sense? Okay. Page 35. Lewis gets a glass of water for her, and she says she lost her job. Quote, and at this she sagged in on herself, shaking, and began to weep. When Lewis touched a finger to her arm, she fell against him, quaking. It's okay, he said. Resting against his shoulder, Lisa cried and shivered and slowly grew still. Then abruptly, she was crying once again. She wavered in this way, as the white midday light slowly windowed across the carpet. After she had fallen quiet, Lewis held her and listened to her breathing. The sleeve of his shirt, steeped with her tears, was clinging to his upper arm, and his hand was pinpricking awake on her back. He could feel the warm pressure of her head against his collarbone. He slid his fingers over the rungs of her spine, smoothing the ripples from her blouse, and she seemed to subside into the bedding of the sofa. Her stockings, sleek and coffee brown, were beginning to ladder at the knee, and Lewis reached to touch a ravel of loose nylon. He found himself instead curling a hand through her hair. It's a moment of sympathy, and it's expressed tangibly and physically with descriptions of her breathing that parallel those that he wrote about Caroline. Right? Caroline sobs, he sobs with her. And the way that they breathe and the way that they touch is what the narrator focuses on. Here, Lisa is sobbing, and he has a similar kind of response. Page 36. Lisa lifted her head, looking him in the eye as his fingers swept across a rise in her scalp. He felt her breath mingling with his, her eyes drawing near, staring into his own. They seemed to hover before him like splashes of reflected light, and Lewis wondered what they saw. The tip of her nose met with his, and when she licked her lips, he felt her tongue glance across his chin. His lips were dry and tingling, his stomach tight as a seed pod. When his hand gave a reflexive flutter on her back, Lisa stiffened. She tilted away from him, blinking. She stood and planed her blouse into the waist of her skirt. "I think you'd better go now," she said. So, Lewis describes his physiological expression of Lisa's nearness in ways that he was unable to do with Caroline. It's a very sexualized scene. They don't have sex. It's a very sexualized scene, unlike even Caroline's kiss where she just licks him, right? Because that's what kids do if you hold them up to your face. Lisa represents a very different possibility of love for him than Caroline does. The narrator at no point addresses this as a possibility of love. Totally left blank. Page 37. Description of loneliness. Quote, "It was exactly this sense of latitude and secret depth my own house is missing. The objects here are only what they are, with nothing to mediate the fact of their existence with the fact of their existence in my life. The walls are only walls, the carpet only carpet, and I am only and ever myself. I walk from room to room, and everything that belongs to me drifts by like a mist. These are my life's little accidents, as sediments trickled through from my past. They are nothing to do with me." Loneliness is having a world that only points to you without having an outside context. It's a world that remains safe in its isolation, but its safety makes it feel empty and shorn of any significance. And the worst of it is, it's not only, like here, in the magic of love, everything is integrated and comes together as being more than what it is, right? When it's deprived of that secret depth, when everything falls apart and crumbles into this object and that object, none of which have anything more to do with me than like a chair at an airport waiting room, right? Or the carpet in a lounge somewhere. Those objects have nothing to do with me. And when your own house is things, when the objects that accumulate your past to you have that same feeling of disassociation, it gets to a point where the me and the I relate in that same way, where the me that you used to be becomes just as flat and useless as the I that you are now. That's loneliness. Does that make sense? It's a really, really, I think, beautiful description of that. Page 39. When he returns to the Mitchell house, Thomas, the father/husband, answers and tells him that his services will no longer be required. Lewis wants to ask why, but anticipates the response, "You know why." Brockmeier continues, quote, "And yet, though he's coming to understand certain things, that his time here ran to a halt the day before, that his actions then were a form of betrayal, he does not, in fact, know anything." He loves Caroline. That's his first love. Lisa can't enter into the world. She's not really there. And he understands that something happened and that something went wrong, but he can't actually know what it is. Because for him, Caroline is his world, and that's all there is. And it's hard to think beyond that for him at this moment as he's writing. Page 40. Lewis is told that he can't say goodbye, so he walks around the house to peek into Caroline's window. Quote, he wants to rap against the glass, to pry it from its frame, to reach across Caroline's blankets and pull her into his arms, but he doesn't. Instead, he lowers his hand and retreats to his car. He will realize as he slows into his driveway that he has just performed one of the most truly contemptible acts of his life. If he were a good man, he would have found a way, no matter the resistance, to tell her goodbye, to hand her, like an offering, some statement of his love, to leave her with at least this much. He certainly could have tried. He did not, though. He simply left. He realizes that his leaving left something to be desired, and he can't understand why, even on reflection. I would argue that it has something to do with the shock of an adult love that interrupts his idealization of Caroline. So even though he returns to Caroline as his primary love object, it seems an overly safe choice for him to make, in spite of its somewhat scandalous ramifications, right? Like, you don't go around bragging that your soulmate is an 18-month-old. But how safe is it to let yourself have all those joys and that experience of the magic of love for something that won't ever trouble it? I mean, most Caroline will do is poop her pants or spit up on you, right? And especially now that she's removed and he won't see her anymore, his idealization of her as his love object, totally safe. And you can have all the feelings of love and risk absolutely nothing at all. And again, it works. It's a cheat, right? It's a way to kind of game the system. It can work, but it leaves him lonely. Absolutely lonely. The safer you are, the more lonely you'll become. And you can have kind of the illusion of that magic. You can have the flavor of it, but it's just wish fulfillment. It's not real. It's not actually there. Page 41, quote, I often dream of Caroline. One day, perhaps we will flee together in my car. In the autumn, the leaves will fall red from the trees as our windshield blades fan away pepperings of rain. And on the easy, tonic nights of spring, we'll watch the far white stars and the soaring red airplanes ask, which is the more beautiful, which the more true? And in finding our answers, we will find what we believe in. And that's the end of the story. And the conclusion, of course, is a reference to Plato's Symposium. It's a closing homage to the beautiful and the true that one arrives at through the mediation of love. And at the end, one is left with little certainty and many questions. And it doesn't matter whether the fictional Lewis really loved an 18-month-old girl or whether he really loved the girl's mother. And back in the list of numbers, Lisa Mitchell is somebody about whom he has both dreams and nightmares. You know, if you go back and actually look through the list, it's kind of telling in its way of other things that the narrator doesn't become self-aware about. It doesn't matter whether both were different kinds of love. The facts of the story aren't important. The author signals from the story's beginning that it's not that kind of a story, right? The facts aren't the story. It's how we relate to it. It's what meaning we find within it. That's what matters. Any questions about that? Here are some implications, or one maybe. Readers in the story are encouraged not to look at facts, but to wonder about love and wonder about the way that it strikes us. At its most superficial level, this pokes at, like I said before, at the idea of a fated or a destined love, or even a soulmate that we're supposed to find, right? The whole Aristophanes notion of our other half that we're looking the world to find, no, there's none of that. Instead, I mean, he makes an argument ad absurdum in some ways, but I think it's successful. I think it does a good job of exposing the folly of that kind of thinking about love. But at a deeper level, given the setting of the story, Brockmeier invites us to ask about the metaphors that we use to describe our love. As magnetic attraction, as music, as a salient point. He opens up the world of love as well as the faulty lessons that shape our conception of it. Whether or not he loved Carolyn or Lisa, her mother, his openness to their sufferings allowed him a way of being present in their house and in the world. His non-sexualized love of Carolyn offers a vision of how to apply a Socratic kind of love in the world, right? Incredibly Socratic in the way that he loved Carolyn. It had nothing to do with sex, that love instead fueled him to appreciate what was beautiful and what was true and what was good, right? I mean, he went right up the ladder of love to be able to generalize in that Socratic sort of way. But it also shows how the awareness that love opens up within us can end our sense of isolation and terminate our loneliness, in theory, but also how it's so blind. Because Carolyn, as much as she opens up, as much as she reveals about love, still conceals his possibility of being loved as him. And that's a possibility that only emerges in a brief moment of smallness that he feels with Lisa, when he's helpless and insignificant, and therefore open to love at a very different level than what he feels with Carolyn. Does that mean?
Is what we're talking about here, it's like he, is the word you'd use trust? He's trusting the love too readily and just allowing it to, okay, let me take that back a step. So passion is something we undergo.
Mm-hmm.
It's also something we can think about and by so doing, like, gain some control over it.
Right. But that destroys that firsthand experience of it.
It destroys the firsthand experience of it, but it also, that control maybe turns it into something a little more applicable to real life.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it's a dialectical process, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you undergo it, then you think about it, and then, you know, so I mean, if you go through the hermeneutic arc, you have, you know, your first naivete is being overwhelmed by that experience of love,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have a moment of suspicion that gives you a critical distance. Like, wait, what is this that I'm feeling? What's going on? Oh, here are all these metaphors. Here's all this language. Here's the causes. Here's the effects. Oh, now I get it, right? You reach a third moment of understanding where you get what's going on. Like, oh, when I feel these sorts of things in these sorts of ways and have these sorts of metaphors to explain what's going on, that's what love means. And that more rich sense of love opens you up to a second naivete, where the next time you undergo love, it's richer and it's deeper, because it's building on that moment of understanding and that moment of suspicion. But those aren't love.
No.
There's no passion there.
But they do require that self-reflective
Yeah,
thought.
that is that process of self-reflective thought, right? The suspicion over what I'm doing, the understanding that I gain, which fuses the I and the me in some ways, right? That's that moment of understanding. It's when one's reflecting on one's own life or one's own experience. It's an understanding of the self. It's the understanding of how I experience my experiences, right? It joins the I and whatever object of thought there is together. If you're thinking about yourself, it joins the I and the me into an integrated moment of understanding, but it's not passionate,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no passion there. There's nothing that you undergo. It's distanced, right? It becomes a fact. It becomes something you put language around. There's really no language around the first naivete. But when you get to the second naivete, when you fall in love again, or when you have a new encounter with that feeling of love, it's far richer because it's building on that kind of understanding. Whether that understanding is magnetic attraction or music or salient point, doesn't matter, right? Because they're all ways that deepen and enhance our ability to experience the most profound experience there is. Other questions?
So if love is something that is so deeply intertwined with how you experience with and interact with the world, why is it necessary that you need another living human being to substantiate those feelings?
What do you mean by substantiate?
Why can't it just happen? Or why can't there be some source for this love other than another living human being? Like
it can just happen. I mean, there are people who love music. There are people who love their job. There are people, people who love nature, right? Or people who love God, right? It doesn't require another human being. Exactly. But physiologically, to get, I think, that full human experience, it requires somebody who can be a partner. And the way that that love unfolds and emerges is far more nobly limited, right? It's not the infinite love that you can have of nature or of God. It's really particular, and it's really fragile and small. It can hurt, and it can feel great. And it's far more reflective of what it means to be human than the kind of infinite love that are offered by less tangible objects. Did that answer your question?
So it's more of a visceral and encompassing love than something that's maybe more romantic in nature?
It's more human. And to be human is to be limited, and to be finite, and to not be in control.
Almost like love of nature is just too easy.
Yeah. Well, it's too abstracted, right? And it doesn't, again, it's safe. The way, all those big loves, right? I love God in this big way, or I love nature, or I love this, right? Or these kind of abstracted ideological things that you can love. I love my country. They're big loves that make you feel big, right? But they protect you from being loved. That's what's pernicious about them. To be loved, to unlearn your loneliness, requires feeling small and broken and fragile. Because that's the only way that love's able to get inside and penetrate to the core of your own being. And that love is far riskier.
It might not penetrate at that point, you know? Like that moment of smallness maybe invites love, but it doesn't guarantee.
It doesn't
love.
guarantee it, but it opens you to receiving it, right? I mean, there's no way that it can get past a big love when that's in the way, right? But there's a kind of comfort too that comes from another living human person, from touch, from silence that's shared, from compassion that emerges, right? And that kind of love, it's deep. It's really easy to feel, and it's harder to get that from nature or the USA, right? It's harder to get that. It's easier to feel compassion when you're small and to receive it as such when you're human, deeply human. Does that make more sense?
Yeah. So is the only reason why love is here, hold on. So is love the only thing capable of alleviating this kind of loneliness because this kind of loneliness was caused by love?
Oh, so okay, you're talking about like the shattered kind of loneliness.
Right.
Okay. It's a good question. I'm going to have like 5 seconds of silence rather than speaking here to think of how to answer the question, if you can permit me.
So did this kind of loneliness exist before the first love that he felt?
No. I don't think so, right? And Jerome Miller, in a book called In the Throe of Wonder, talks about the way that a child sees the world as opposed to the way that adults do. And children are just imperial over the world. The world's all about them. And they're the ones at the center of it, right? Everything in a child's life is about the child. So you're not your own person, you're the child's parent, right? It's not your car, it's the child's car. It's that which takes, right? The children don't understand how to not have themselves be at the center of the world. That's why they're incredible narcissists, right? They don't have an ability to think outside of that. Once you get that ability to think outside of that, and you're not in the center, I mean, not everybody leaves the center of their own lives, right? Some people live there forever. But once you're not there, it's there that you have the space to love, but also the space to be lonely, right? And so in some ways, I mean, some people look for another version of themselves to relate to there. I mean, that's Freud's argument for love. Essentially, that's what we do. We find ways to love ourselves through other people who represent ourselves for us, but it's really all narcissism all the way along. Freud's kind of cynical about love. We'll save him for another day, though. But I think that's where we learn loneliness, is it's just at a point where we lose ourselves as the center of our world, and we start looking for something that could become a center. And the only way I think love, what we call love, or what we call that experience, is another way of calling that which has the connective or integrating power to harmonize all the disparate threads of our life in a way that coheres and makes sense, but not just sense, that makes it meaningful, that makes it important, makes it beautiful and good and true. And that's what we just call love. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so
Kind of
is the reason why it is beautiful that it defies logic, or does that just happen to be the case with love?
I mean, aesthetics isn't a logical system exactly. I mean, beauty isn't logic based. So the fact that both love and beauty aren't predicated in some sort of because effect logic, I mean, that's true. But I think that they both independently have that quality rather than the beauty of it causing love to be that way, right? I think they just both accidentally have the same kind of property, but their possession of that property independently makes it, I think, part of what's important for humans. And part of what I want to do with CHI is talk about those kinds of things in that kind of way, those things that don't have use value or functional value, but I think are incredibly important to what it means to be human and what we're doing here. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Daniel, thinking back some of the stuff we've read about the Greeks, but my question was, do you think this story is only pertinent to people in our time, in our culture? I mean, could this have been written about Bedouins? I mean, and a Bedouin would feel this way, or this is us, this is us?
I think that the examples that he uses, like magnets or salient points, or some of the stories that he tells, are late 20th century, early 21st century American. I mean, that's fine. I mean, those are the metaphors that are in the world that Brockmeier lives in as an author. I think that if you read Rumi, if you read whoever else in whatever other culture, the words that they use are trying to get at something similar to what Brockmeier is expressing through his own world, right?
Yeah, the magnetism is a powerful metaphor.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just beautiful.
And if you live in a society that doesn't have magnets, you're going to find something else, right? I mean, you're going to find something that gets to that point of attractive power. But magnets is really handy once you know what a magnet is, right? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Anything else?
Very good.
Was that helpful?
Yeah, that was great.
Very.
Okay. Is that interesting?
Very